Hi world, it's the 14th of September 2021. All the big boys are retrograde. Jupiter, Saturn, Chiron, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, they're all moving backwards. Mercury is going to be going retrograde soon-ish. It's already in its retrograde shadow. Venus changed sign a couple of days ago. Mars will change sign later today. Mars will move from Virgo into Libra. So Mars is currently at 29 degrees of Virgo. And as I record this, the moon is at 29 degrees of Sagittarius, about to move into Capricorn. By the time this video goes live, the moon will be in Capricorn. So there's a lot of shifting and changing going on. A lot of retrospect and reassessment, especially with all the big retrogrades going on. So that leads me to sort of question a lot of things. And I find my thinking over recent times has been heavily influenced by one or two American astrologers. Not so much the more populous ones, more the obscure ones. One in particular, I forget his name. But he's been saying, look, isn't it time that we reassessed the way astrology really works? Throughout history, we've always been tempted to say, okay, there's fate and destiny, or there's free will and self-determination. And the planets impel, but they don't compel. And over my teachings in the last year and a half, what I've realised is that the aspects between planets are much more about defining the character of a person. And the transits to the planets define the events that happen in a person's life. And the aspects are much more important than the position of the planets in the signs, or to a lesser extent, the houses. So when I started thinking about that a bit more deeply, I thought, well, in the 21st century, bearing in mind that because of precession, because of the solar system's relative position relative to the constellations of the galaxy, and our slow but gradual movement around galactic centre, the signs of the zodiac in the sky, the constellations in the sky, no longer relate to the astrological constellations, which is why that when we look at the sun in Gemini, for example, it's actually in the constellation of Cancer. Or when we're looking at the sun in Sagittarius, it's actually in the constellation of Capricorn. Everything's moved about 33 degrees since the signs of the zodiac and the constellations in the sky did align, which was around 200 AD. So I begin to question, do planets in signs of the zodiac still have as much impact now as they once did? When you get generations of people for 10, 15 years born with Pluto or Neptune in one sign, you cannot say that they behave in a certain way. Uranus, 7 years in a sign. Even Saturn, 2.5 years in a sign. Or Jupiter, 1 year in a sign. Can you say that because so-and-so is born with Jupiter in Virgo, that they then behave like this? I don't think you can. I think that certainly with the outer planets, the signs of the zodiac that the planet is in is far less significant than the house. And of course, the house of the zodiac that a planet is in is determined by the time of birth. This is why the time of birth has become so important. With the time of birth, we can find the ascendant, which is always the start of the first house. Always. But the ascendant didn't come into use until about 100, 200 AD. So it's only been around for 2,000 years, whereas planets in signs have been known about for at least 6,000 years. The earliest we can trace the usage of astrology back is back to the Sumerian Empire around about 4,600 BC, where we see on the copper scrolls the priests pointing to the constellations above the king's head at the moment he gets crowned. But then you deal with the inner planets. Now, I do begin to question whether the meaning of Mercury and Venus and Mars in the signs of the zodiac is as important as the house of the zodiac, and I'm beginning to think it's not. But the sun sign, and certainly the moon sign, and the ascendant sign, and the midheaven sign, these are really important. The moon, particularly by sign and by house, and the sun by sign and house, you can't diminish the sun sign as opposed to in favour of the sun house. You can with the planets, but not the sun and moon. But then the sun and moon are not planets. In astrology, they're called the luminaries, the lights. And these are the two basics in the chart. I mean, the sun deals with identity and willpower and individuality and sense of uniqueness, and the moon reflects the light of the sun onto the earth. So the moon reflects the light of the sun out of the individual. The moon is about one's feelings and emotions and sensitivities and habit patterns. It's one personality. So individuality and personality, sun and moon. Here the sun sign and the moon sign are important, along with the ascendant and the midheaven. And indeed the differences between the sun, moon, ascendant and midheaven, and the differences between sign of the zodiac, house of the zodiac, and the aspects between planets, the basic meaning of the basics of the patterning here forms the first lesson of the first module of the beginner's course on astrology that I'm starting in a week and a half's time. So this has been on my mind because I've been researching it and sort of writing down my thinking and thinking, well, how has this changed? And I've really noticed that since I started teaching in September of last year, my ideas have really changed more than normal. But then we live in very changing times. It seems that the nature of time is either slowing down or speeding up. And I'm beginning to look ahead to 2022 because I'm doing so many individual client readings that you can't help but notice that certain patternings next year are going to be significant. So here's a little taster. The Saturn-Uranus square will continue into next year. Not as strong as this year, but it will continue, which tells me that COVID is still going to be in the newspapers and on the televisions next year, but not to the same extent it has been this year or last. What I'm really looking at next year is the time around, I think it's the end of February, when Jupiter sextiles Uranus, and particularly the time around, I think it's early April, maybe early mid-April, second week of April, when there's a Jupiter-Neptune conjunction at 23 degrees of Pisces. That is going to set the cat amongst the pigeons. That is going to create a lot of big changes. And I suggest already that early April next year is going to see a real surge of information around either viruses, toxins, poisons, and environmental issues based around oil, water, possibly medicines, narcotics, all Jupiter-Neptune stuff in Pisces, and it is going to be larger than life and over the top. I've already advised a number of clients that the Jupiter-Neptune conjunction, second week of April, excellent time for being on holiday and not being in the hothouse seat. Come to that one another time. Okay, I'm rambling. Time to get going. I've got more readings to do. Catch you later, world. I'm doing the beginner's course starting next Thursday. I've still got about 25-30 places left. You know how to get hold of me. Steve@stevejudd.co. Catch you later, world. Bye.